this particular episode, we shall continue our discussion on the coming of sound, how cinema transformed from being silent to being talkies, and how it overcame the teething troubles. Now, in the earlier episode, we had discussed that in the first 2 years of conversion to sound, that is in 1927, 28 and a little bit of 29, the production houses, the studios faced all kinds of problems, and they had to sink in a lot of money in order to convert to sound, in terms of making the studios and the movie halls soundproof, in terms of acquiring new cameras and new projectors and so on and so forth. Okay? So, those investments had been made, but in terms of aesthetics, cinema suddenly took a backseat because the camera became immobile, the actors lost their mobility, the camera couldn't go out of the studio. Okay, editing also became lost its fluidity because editing had to be done with the sound. Okay, so these were some of the problems. Then one fine day, somebody got an idea that why record the sound and the visual in the same camera on the same film strip? Why not have a separate camera, which you can call the sound camera, and load it with a film strip and record the sound in that camera, okay? And the other camera would record only the visuals. So that was a bright idea. I mean, that could have been practiced right from the beginning, but nobody had ever thought of that. So it was a bright idea, although it meant a little more expenditure, because if, say for example, one had to buy 20 cans of raw stock film, then for this one had to buy 40 cans, because simultaneously 2 cans would be loaded in the 2 cameras. One would record the visuals, the images, the other would record the sound. But the advantage was that now the main camera, which recorded the visuals, could come out of its ice box because it was no longer recording the sound, and it got back its mobility. It could now move on tracks, it could pan, it could crane up, and it could do all kinds of things. And the sound camera was confined in that ice box, although no cameraman had to sit there because there was no question of framing or proper lighting and all that. It would just mechanically record the sound with the sound on film by that optical process. Okay. So that was a very good thing, and it immediately people understood the wisdom of this system. And then they went one step further. They told themselves, okay, now that we have separated the audio and the video, the sound and the visuals are being recorded at 2 different places with 2 different cameras, then we need not use the sound recorded during the shooting also. We can record it and we can keep it as a guide track, but we need not use it. We can create the entire soundtrack separately. So, but now the sound recorded during the shooting, there was no necessity that this would be the final sound that would remain in the movies. Okay, one could recreate the entire soundtrack by the process of dubbing and Foley effects. Now, dubbing is something that after the rough cut is done, any of you might have seen dubbing. Okay, then it is the artists are called again to the studio. They listen to their recorded voice, which is recorded in that second camera or any other tape recorder, and they repeat their dialogues. But now in a much cleaner environment, okay, and they can add some more emotion to it. So they repeat their dialogues, that gets recorded, and that is the final sound that is put. Now, one big advantage of dubbing is that if, for example, any actor doesn't have a good voice or cannot speak the language properly, doesn't know that language, whether English or any other language, then some other actor's voice can be used. Okay, so that was a big blessing, because now there's so many actors who had suddenly become out of job because they couldn't speak English properly. They had a chance to come back again in the industry and get back their job, because now somebody else could dub their voice if their own voices were not good enough. Okay, so dubbing became a popular thing. And then what is this Foley effect? Foley effect is nothing but, when you are not using the soundtrack, you are not using any sound that you have recorded during the shooting. So that means the sound of walking, the sound of keeping this on the table, the slight thud sound of keeping this on the table, okay, the sound of water being poured into the glass, and all other kinds of sound had to be recreated once again in the studio after the rough cut of the film was done. Okay, this is a practice that is done even today, at least in India. And while these sounds are recreated, we need not use the original thing. For example, gunshot. So you don't have to fire a gun in the studio, but you can create the sound of gunshot by taking a paper bag, blowing into it, and then breaking the paper bag. So that would create the sound of gunshot. Okay, sound of rain is created by taking big grain sugars and pouring them into on an aluminum surface from a height, sound of torrential rain. So like that, sound using different things, sounds can be created, and those the Foley art, that is what Foley artists are for. They know what kind of sound is created with what kind of object. So they create that sound, they look at the film, they create the sound, and then that is put in sync with the visual, and all that is done at the post production stage. That means after the rough cut, during that fine cut stage, the entire soundtrack, which has now several layers, actually not just one soundtrack but several soundtracks, that is created at the editing table at the post production stage. Okay, so therefore there is a location sound recordist and there is an audio post production person who is also a sound engineer, who designs the entire soundtrack of the film, and layer by layer he creates the soundtrack of the film, okay, to add to the ambience, to add to the drama, and so on. Okay, so this is what happened when people got the bright idea that sound and visual could be separately recorded. Okay, that is when this practice of post synchronization, of dubbing, of adding Foley effects started. And then again cinema got back its fluidity, its maturity, and that's the time when actually the golden era of Hollywood began. All these Hollywood masterpieces that you know today, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, even Citizen Kane, these were all produced in that era, okay, the golden period of Hollywood. So that is the story of the coming of sound. Now, all filmmakers did not accept the coming of sound with open arms. And one such filmmaker was Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin had gained a lot of fame, a lot of popularity in the silent era because of his mime, because of his tramp comedian character. Films like The Kid, Gold Rush, they were runaway success. Okay, so Charlie Chaplin did not warm up to the idea of sound, and if he said, this I am just quoting from his autobiography, "If I did make a talking picture, no matter how good I was, I could never surpass the artistry of my pantomime. I had thought of possible voices for the tramp, whether he should speak in monosyllables or just mumble. But it was no use. If I talked, I would become like any other comedian." These were the melancholy problems that confronted me. So, Charlie Chaplin was in two minds, that whether to adapt sound or not to adapt sound. On one hand, he felt that when all the movie halls were announcing 100% all talkies, who would come to Charlie Chaplin's silent film? Okay, did he have that much charisma to wean away the people from talkies and make them watch his silent films? So he was slightly doubtful about that. On the other hand, he thought if he converted to talkies, then his charm as a pantomime artist would be diminished. Okay, so therefore he thought and he struck compromises. Now, the first Charlie Chaplin film to use sound is City Lights, which was released in 1931. If you remember, The Jazz Singer was released in 1927, the first sound film to have sync dialogues, and City Lights was released in 1931. City Lights was conceived as a silent film with intertitles, but he made creative use of sound, and that is why I am talking about Charlie Chaplin here, because he showed that sound could be used imaginatively, creatively, to heighten the drama, to create humor, and so on. Now, in the opening scene of City Lights, we see that there is a big crowd that has gathered and the mayor is going to unveil a statue. So when the statue is unveiled, a huge statue, everybody sees that Charlie Chaplin is peacefully sleeping on the lap of the statue. Okay. So in the beginning, that big crowd has gathered and the mayor is giving speech. So all that Charlie Chaplin has used as a gibberish. I mean, you can't make out the words. People are talking. Okay, that you can. It's like a cacophony, but you can't make out the words. So he has used that sound, the dialogues, more like an effect rather than conveying something meaningful. And later on in 1936, in the film Modern Times, he has used absolutely marvelous use of sound. Although Modern Times is at heart a silent film. Okay, there are intertitles and everything, but at the same time, there is a lot of spoken word, there are dialogues and there are sound effects which are very, very creatively used. So that's how Charlie Chaplin has shown that sound can be used creatively to different purposes other than simply speaking dialogues. Now, after these experimentations, then Charlie Chaplin eventually converted entirely to talkies, and the three of his most famous full-fledged talkies are The Great Dictator, Moshe Verdu and Limelight, which are full-fledged talkies. And in Moshe Verdu and Limelight, we don't see the tramp comedian anymore. So he is just, Charlie Chaplin is just like any other person, so that the pantomime role of the actor is minimized and the humor becomes more of a verbal humor.
Good morning, monsieur.
Good morning.
I have a registered letter for Madame Thelma Varney.
Ah, thank you.
Oh, no. Madame will have to sign for it.
Oh, I see. Just a moment. Thelma, darling, a registered letter, my dear. You must sign for it.
If you analyze the soundtrack of a film, any film, you can recognize 5 elements in it. What are the 5 elements? First, the spoken word, which includes the dialogue and the narration. Narration means the voice-over narration. Second, music. Now, music can be diegetic and non-diegetic. Now, what is diegetic music? Music created by a character. Okay, like somebody is singing or somebody is practicing violin. Now, where the music becomes a part of the narrative. That is diegetic music. And non-diegetic music is the music that is put later on to enhance the feel of the film, which is not a part of the narrative. So music can be of 2 types. Then of course there are the synchronous sound effects which are put in sync with all the actions. Okay, whether it is car crashing or somebody driving or somebody having a bath or anything, any other action. So those sound effects in sync with the action is synchronous sound effects. And then there are these non-synchronous sound effects also, which are just for effects, like rain. Now, when you put the sound of rain, it doesn't have to synchronize with any action. Even a telephone ringing, okay, the telephone is there and you just put the sound of the telephone, you don't have to synchronize with any action. Okay, so those are the non-synchronous sound effect. Or something being heard very far away and some sound is drifting. Okay, through the open window, some sound is drifting. So you don't see the action, but you only hear the sound. So those are the non-synchronous sound effects. And the 5th element in the soundtrack of a film is silence, where there is no music, no sound, pure silence. And silence is something most filmmakers or most sound designers are afraid of dealing with, because they fear that if there is a stretch of silence, the audience will begin to get restless. Okay, so anyway, be that as it may, these are the 5 elements on the soundtrack of a film. Each has its own utility. Okay, now I will just read out a very interesting dialogue sequence from Charlie Chaplin's film Limelight. So the girl Terry, she's saying, "But you are not that great comedian." Calvero, who is Charlie Chaplin actually, Calvero is saying, "I was." Terry, "To hear you talk, no one would ever think you were a comedian." Calvero, "I am beginning to realize that. I can't get a job." Terry, "What a sad business, being funny." Calvero, "Very sad, if they won't laugh." So here, they are talking, it's full of double meanings. whatever they are saying, it's full of double meanings, full of, you can read between the lines. So this is a very interesting dialogue sequence from a film. So when these films, the talkies started and the actors had to mouth the dialogues, then writing scripts became an essential stage in the pre-production process of filmmaking. Prior to that, even Charlie Chaplin or D.W. Griffith, all these maestros didn't bother to write full-fledged scripts. They had the entire scheme in their mind and they were the directors and producers. So they went on the floor and they gave instruction, this is what I want, like that. But now the actors had to learn the dialogues before they came to the floor for shooting. Okay, so for that the scripts had to be written and shared with the actors, with the cast and the crew. So script writing became an essential step, and the writers were in great demand in Hollywood. So whether they were authors, writers of books, or whether they were playwrights in Broadway, they were offered lucrative salaries, and many of them came and made a good living in Hollywood. Okay, and slowly they realized that filmic dialogues are very different from theatrical dialogues. Filmic dialogues are less rhetorical and more like an everyday conversation, although full of, you can make them loaded with meaning and interesting and open to interpretations also, even though they sound natural. So writing dialogues is not at all easy. And dialogues, of course, have their own purpose. They reveal a character, they take the narrative forward, they give essential information, they arouse curiosity, and so on and so forth. So we all know that. Now we come to music. Music, live music had always been an accompaniment with cinema. In the orchestra pit, the musicians used to sit and play live music, okay, in the silent era. So obviously, in the early talkies, music was an essential component in the soundtrack of the film. And if you watch the early talkies, not only Indian films, but also Hollywood films, you will see that they are very heavy on music. And that was actually a legacy of the orchestra pit thing, that continuously there was music playing. Okay, but then the people realized, the filmmakers, the sound designers, that so much of music is not necessary. Okay, music of course sets the mood in a film. It underlines the emotion in a scene. Say you have this horror music or you have the sad music, all right. So then a viewer gets a cue, okay, what is the emotional content of the scene. It arouses curiosity and sometimes even defines a character. Okay, for every character you can have a particular musical composition or a particular instrument. So these are the various purposes of music, but film music should be minimalistic and barely perceptible. Okay, and then music directors, musicians started doing all kinds of experiments with film music, and they also started doing experiments with sound effect. I'll give you a couple of examples. Say for example, Psycho. Now, if you watch the shower scene of Psycho, when that girl is murdered in the bathtub when she's having bath, she starts shrieking, and the music, which is Bernard Herrmann's composition music, that blends with her shriek. Okay, so that is with the sound effect, the music is blended. There is music, but it blends with the sound effect, and it also has the shrieking kind of effect. That is typically film music made for that particular film, for that particular scene in Psycho. So therefore, the music composer had to understand what effect the director wants and compose the music accordingly. You can't just pick up any music from anywhere and put to the visuals. That is not going to work. So now coming to the sound effect, what are the various sound effects for? Why does the film need sound? Number one, of course, sound effects make the film more realistic. If you hear also while you are watching, naturally the experience becomes more lifelike. Okay, sound effects can also be used to add drama to a scene. Say for example, a grandfather clock is going tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Okay, and somebody is pacing up and down and waiting for the son to return. Maybe the father is pacing up and down and waiting for the son to return. So the father's anxiety can be underlined by putting the tick-tock sound of the grandfather clock in reverb. The entire room is filled with the tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock sound of the grandfather clock. In reality, it will not be so loud, but you have deliberately made it loud in order to enhance the drama or underline the emotion, the anxiety of the father who is waiting for the son to return. Okay, so like that, a sound effect can be used for dramatic purpose. You know, there is a Russian film, an early talkie, that as a result of the revolution, some of the workers, they had picketed on the railway track in order to stop the train, and the youngest of them, the train ran over accidentally, and the youngest of them died. So the body of that young worker was put on the roof of the train, and then all the other workers got into the train and they brought the train back to the station. So when the train comes and stops at the station, it gives away the steam, and that sounds like the collective sigh of all the workers who are in the train. Okay, but it's actually the train giving away, the engine giving out the steam, but it is used to a dramatic purpose. Okay, so sound effects can be very well used to dramatic purpose. Coming to one Bengali film, Gupika in Baghamine, there is a scene where you continuously hear the third, dhap, dhap sound, and for a long time you don't know what it is till the camera reveals that a character Bagha is fast asleep under a tree. Beside him there is a drum, and water is dripping from the tree, falling on the drum and creating the dhap, dhap, dhap sound. So the sound is taking us to a particular spot and it is arousing curiosity. Till we see that, the source of the sound, we are curious. What is this? What are we hearing? So like that, these are some examples where sound can be used to dramatic effect. I will give the example of another Bengali film, Meghe Dhaka Tara, made by Ritwik Ghatak, where mother from outside the window, mother sees that the eldest daughter is getting a little intimate or getting very friendly with one character called Shonot. Okay, and the mother is worried that she will get married and she is the only breadwinner of the family, so mother is a little worried. And she was actually cooking rice, so that sound of the cooking rice, baj sound is there on the soundtrack. Okay, so we hear that, and there is a close-up of the mother's face showing anxiety. Much later in the film, the mother sees the same scene, a very similar scene once again. At that time she is not cooking, it's evening time, she is not cooking, but Ritwik Ghatak has used that same sound on the soundtrack because that sound of cooking rice now got associated with the mother's anxiety. So to remind us about the mother's anxiety, he has repeated the sound in order to play on our association. So like that, filmmakers started experimenting with sound design and doing all kinds of things. Sound can be used to create an off-screen space. You see a film like Charulata. Charulata is confined indoors and the crow is cawing outside. She is also pining to go out. She shoos away the crow, she shoos away the crow. We don't see the crow, but we know that there is a world outside. Her world, which is all confined indoors. So it's creating an off-screen space. The sound is creating an off-screen space. So sound can be used to suggest the depth of space. Say Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane, when husband and wife lived in that big mansion Xanadu, Susan Alexander, she is whiling away her time doing this crossword puzzle, and then suddenly she looks up and asks, Charlie, what time is it now? So the entire sound echoes, just to suggest that she is so alone in that big mansion.
Charlie, what time is it? 11:30.
New York?
So these are some of the creative uses of sound. Silence, of course, is needless to say. If the entire soundtrack is packed with sound, then it will be too much, too overpowering. So therefore, there are breathing spaces that are required. Silence gives those breathing spaces. Also, if a loud thud sound is preceded by a silence, then obviously the thud becomes more dramatic. Okay, so therefore silence is also very important, and sound designers should not shy away from using silence in their sound design, because that is also an important component of the sound design. So in conclusion, I would like to say that sound is the more abstract component of the film than the moving image, because it's something you cannot see. So the abstraction makes it difficult to understand and appreciate its worth. But at the same time, the abstraction is also its strength or its virtue, because the sound is, when you hear the sound, it need not emanate from an object. Okay, there need not be a body to the sound. So therefore, the source of the sound can be anything, and it can suggest something else. So you can play with suggestions, okay, because of its value of abstraction. And when properly used, sound enhances the magic of the moving image. Needless to say, it definitely enhances the magic of the moving image. So images and sound complement each other in movies, and they make our film viewing experience complete and magical. So both are equally important for the making of cinema.